This is an extract about, it's just during the time of the wedding of the central character of the book, Ruth, and it takes place in sort of the mid-1950s. She's a student at the Royal College of Music. She's studying the piano, so there's a reference to music. She's about to get married. Every time she thought about anything, it seemed to have a bed in it. In her suitcase was a small round tin, housing a dome of thick dark rubber the colour of a flypaper. Absurdly, this would prevent her from having babies, at least for the time being. She had a final year at the Royal College to see out. Her father had suggested she quit now that she was to be a wife, with wifely things to do, but Harry, her future husband, saw no reason why she should not carry on, and Ruth wanted to. The gynecologist in Portland Place had instructed her to practice inserting and removing the device before the honeymoon. She must first lie down, get the thing in. Then, after use, a prescribed amount of hours later, she was to remove the thing, wash it in tepid water, never hot, for very hot water could cause the rubber to perish. At last, she must dry it carefully before sprinkling the barest coating of talcum powder over the dome, like dusting icing sugar onto a fairy cake. In her room, she had blushed alone as she removed it from its tin. The bed felt too high, too exposed, so she lay on the narrow rug beside it. First she tried lying on her back, then on her side. The base of the dome was a sprung ring. The trick was to narrow it between two fingers while probing with the other hand. Once in place, you could let go and the ring would resume its circular form, fitting over what her doctor had told her was called the cervix, like a tiny brimless hat. There was a knack to it, apparently. Evidently it was a knack she did not possess. The device kept springing out of her hand and across the rug. On one attempt it jumped several feet as far as the door. Ruth began to laugh, but laughing alone was ridiculous and made it harder to concentrate. It was all quite impossible. It would never fit. It would leap out at Harry on her wedding night, startling as a frog, and she would be too ashamed to face him ever again. For several days she made no further attempts. The tin sat undisturbed, a shameful secret in the drawer among her underthings. Then, intrepid after a day of studying, she strode home and went straight up to her room, unlaced her shoes, unfastened her suspender belt, and pulled down her woolen stockings and tried again in broad daylight, not lying down as the doctor had told her, but standing up in her bare feet, one foot raised on the chair at the end of the bed. This was the way one of Wagner's Valkyrie would put in her Dutch cap, she thought, and it brought victory. Getting it out, which had worried her, what if it got stuck, turned out to be much easier than putting it in. None of this augured well for the honeymoon, though. There was nothing pleasurable in the probing necessitated by the contraceptive device. How could actual lovemaking be any different? Ruth didn't mean to keep thinking about how it would turn out in that department, but somehow her thoughts always came back to settle on it, like a bee returning again and again to the same plant. She liked kissing, she and Harry had done plenty of that, but she did feel anxious about the next bit. Their room at the hotel by Lake Garda had long wooden shutters and a paper of big orangish flowers. The candlewick bed cover was an anemic tangerine, not the bright colour of a tangerine's skin, but the colour of the tight, pithy inside of an underripe fruit. At first, Ruth disliked the room's decor. It embarrassed her somehow, and she gravitated towards the window, which framed a view of blue water, distant villas and air. But by the second morning she loved it all, the ugly tufted bedspread, the coyness of the spindly chairs, even the stiff bath taps. No wonder people spoke of married bliss. It turned out that what happened in bed was perfectly lovely. You could kiss all the way through, which had surprised her. She had imagined that kissing was only a preliminary, a first course. Nor did you have to keep your eyes shut. You could look, you could kiss any part of each other, you could take as long as you liked. It seemed there was nothing you couldn't do. There were no forbidden zones, and all of it was just the best feeling ever. Their time in bed made her love Harry more than ever, in a slightly dotty way, at once hypnotised and ravenous. It also had the strange effect of making her fall rather in love with herself. Ruth's body was not something she had ever thought much about. She carried it around, dressed it, fed it when it was hungry. When she looked in the glass before going out for an evening, she occasionally tutted at her unshapely legs, her disobliging hair. Now she found herself amazed at her own flesh while she bathed, at her heavy breasts and the freckles on her forearms. She suddenly felt for the first time that she might be beautiful.
It's a real in-your-face extract from your novel. And it's such a privilege to hear your voice. One's always curious about the sound of novels. And why did you call it My Former Heart?
Well, all the time I was working on the book, for some reason I had been reading Wordsworth's poem Tintern Abbey. and the line comes from Tinton Abbey, and there's a very beautiful bit at the end from which that line comes, where he describes going back to this place where he'd visited with his beloved sister Dorothy, and he says, "In your voice I hear the language of my former heart," about her. And I loved the idea that somebody's voice could embody your kind of whole landscape of the heart, and I think a lot of the book is about sort of second chances. So in a way, what I describe throughout it is sort of the first attempts that people have at love and how that can go wrong, and then it goes into a second chance if you're lucky. So I think that's why I called it that. Yes, I was attracted to it.
Well, let's dig a bit into this word about. As I recall, Tinton Abbey starts with a description of long years, and yours is a very long novel chronologically, isn't it? It's got
Yes.
3 generations of women.
One of the things I wanted to explore was women who leave their children. It's a thing that had happened in my own family with my grandmother and various other people, and I wrote a biography in which a lot of the women had left their children, and it seemed to me that that was sort of one of the last taboos remaining to us. It's one of the few things that is universally deplored. And so I needed quite a long range in order to be able to do that. I didn't want to just do it in one generation. I wanted to do it across 2 and possibly 3 generations, and to see how that might come about, how it could be that a woman would be separated from her children. So in this case, there's the Second World War, and then there's a divorce in which the father gets custody of the children. And then in the next generation, in fact, the person doesn't abandon their child after all. But that was sort of why I wanted to have quite a long canvas, so that I could, wide canvas, so that I could explore that.
I was struck very much by certain very close-up moments in the novel. I was very moved by the opening, which is a showing of Walt Disney's Dumbo.
Yes.
And then the mother disappears while the little girl's watching. And if you remember, the Disney film is about the separation of child and mother.
Yes,
the elephants.
Yeah.
It struck me that the actual precision of that was very, very beautiful. I don't know if that touched some personal thing in yourself when you
It didn't, in
composed
fact, and
it.
oddly, while I was writing it, it only came to me later that Dumbo, the plot of Dumbo is very similar to the plot of It's Such As It Is of my book. I mean, that it is about a mother abandoning her child, really. But when I chose Dumbo to be the film, it was really because it was the right date, rather than because I was aware of the kind of thematic sort of, union of it.
But there's no censure for Iris for doing that as in the book. You're very tolerant, is that not?
I try to be tolerant because I think that I do try to be tolerant. I think Iris, the woman who abandons her child, is not really a very likeable character, and she's quite brittle. As women, I think, where I sort of remember my grandmother being rather like that. And but I thought it was too sort of obvious to kind of be blaming and things. I wanted to explore why people do things, not sort of censure them for it.
Which of the 4 characters in the 3 generations, principal characters, did you feel closest to, or did you like, or was there anything you didn't? I mean, very often novelists create characters they don't like. Or
I liked the central character Ruth the best. I liked her because she was so sort of ordinary in a way. And funnily enough, I got a letter from a friend who'd read it and said, "I can't believe you've written a book about somebody so ordinary." But in a way, that's the whole point, that she isn't meant to be a remarkable person. She's meant to be quite a kind of straightforward person, really.
why does Iris actually walk out on her daughter?
Well, Iris it's a muddle. Well, another of the themes of the book, in a way, is about the muddle that people get into, how people don't know the most obvious things about each other. So it opens with this scene in the cinema where the mother thinks that she sees her lover on a newsreel. And this was a thing that actually did happen to my grandmother and my mother at the cinema, although I think they were seeing another film, I don't know which one. And so she walks out on her daughter because she wants to go and find this lover that she thinks might have died, and she sees him on a news clip of the Middle East, and so she wants to get out there and manages to get herself posted somehow out there. But the daughter, Ruth, all her life believes that her mother thinks that she saw her father, her actual, the man she's married to, but it isn't him. And so that's why she leaves, really. And I don't think she really gives it much of a backward glance. I don't think it's something she feels guilty about as a mother today would. I think during those times, a lot of women didn't feel such. Perhaps they weren't readers of Freud.
It takes a long time to forgive your parents, doesn't it?
Yes.
And very often it's too late. I mean, you have to throw letters in at the gravestone. But one of the things that was brought up was it didn't seem to end, and it seems to me that there's something very factitious, there's something very artificial, isn't there, about endings? And it seems
Yes.
to me you rather actually sort of, that it's almost like the novel opened rather than closing.
Yes, well, I wanted it, because in the end it is about rather ordinary lives in a sort of a way. I wanted it to have, I thought that if it had a sort of terrifically grand ending, that wasn't really, it wasn't of a piece with who the characters were. And so I wanted it to end with this, I'd always known it would end with this thing of hearing that piece of Bach music, which is about having enough in your life and being satisfied with what you have, rather than yearning for more all the time. So that is quite kind of open in a way, it's true.
Are the granddaughters, in our period, happier or unhappier than their kind of predecessors?
Gosh, that's a question. I think they are almost unhappier. I think they're unhappier. I think it's more difficult for people to be happy than it used to be in a way, because people's expectations are so much greater, and the marketplace is applied to everything, so people sort of think they can shop for happiness now in a way that I think people didn't used to think that. I think people used to make do and mend much more with their lives. So yes, I think perhaps they're less happy.
The judges in Fiction Uncovered noticed that there were a lot of novels, particularly by women incidentally, which went back, a lifespan, 60 years.
Yes.
And there were at least 4 or 5 novels about the period of the Second World War. Why is that? I mean,
I don't know. I wonder if it's in people's unconscious about the Queen's Jubilee or something, if that's bringing things up, or whether that's just the natural span of nostalgia, or I don't know.
Well, usually it's the period of a lifetime, isn't it?
Yes.
It's the last living touch you have with the past. But the novel seems to be very magnetically drawn to that. And it's interesting that you are, because your novel begins, in fact, in 42.
Yes, it does. Well, in real life, I'm a great collector of Ladybird books, which are actually a later period. They're the 60s. And when I was in my sort of fever of collecting them worst, I realised that I was really single-handedly trying to kind of preserve the whole of that period, and I started collecting crockery and games and all sorts of things, and I realised it was a sort of almost like a kind of madness to try and stop time passing. And of course that's what fiction enables you as a writer to do, is to hold something in amber, to stop it, arrest its passing.
You're a critic. What's your feeling about the state of fiction, the English novel, the English short story at the moment? Do you think it's in a good place?
I think it's in a really good place, yes. I do think it's in a very good place. There are a lot of really good writers.
So why do we need these lies? Why do we need things that never happened? There never was a character called Ruth. There never was a character called Iris.
I think it speaks to a sort of ancient, I think it must have gone on, Neolithic times. I think we must have all been huddled round fires telling stories.
So what you mean, you'd be there sort of doing your little daubs on the cave wall in the Cro-Magnon sort of society? Yes, interesting. Yeah. Well, you were brought up in a literary world, of course. I mean, forgive me bringing in the
No, of course.
Did that affect you? I mean, there must have been quite a lot of printer's ink in your bloodstream.
Well, there was certainly a lot of, there were a lot of books in the house I grew up in, that was true, and there were a lot of books, and I suppose that it was quite highbrow. Enid Blyton was disapproved of, and you were supposed to read proper things. So I think it did have an influence. Yes, I mean, I think it did. Yes, I wouldn't have been allowed to read Harry Potter, I don't think.
No.